Have you ever loved someone so much you'd hand them your spare key without thinking twice? Because I did. And that's how my own son, my only child, got close enough to steal the one thing I thought no one could ever take from me. Not my jewelry, not my savings, my house. The house I cried in when my husband died. The house I rebuilt my life inside. The house where every wall still held his voice until my son decided it belonged to him. It started so sweet you'd swear it was a blessing. He began visiting more than usual. He brought groceries, fixed a squeaky door, sat with me while I watched TV. He even called me Mama like he did when he was little. And then he said it. Let me handle your bills, your paperwork. You've been through enough stress. I remember the way he smiled when he said it. It didn't reach his eyes, but I ignored that because mothers, we ignore things that hurt to admit. Weeks later, I got sick. Not a cold, not the flu, the kind of sick that swallows your strength and leaves you staring at hospital ceiling tiles, wondering if you'll ever see home again. And while I was sedated, while I couldn't even lift a cup of water, someone had me sign papers. Papers I never read, papers I barely remember. And when I finally came home, something tiny in the mail slot changed everything. A property tax notice, addressed to my son. My hands shook so hard I dropped it twice. And the worst part? He was already acting like the house was his. But I didn't confront him, not yet. Because the moment I realized what he'd done, I also realized something else. If he could steal my home while I was sick, then I had to get smart while he was comfortable. And that's when I started writing the letter. But what I discovered next made my stomach turn, because my son wasn't acting alone.
The first time I noticed it, it wasn't the paperwork. It was the silence. After my husband, Richard, died, the house got quiet in a way you can feel in your bones, the kind of quiet that presses on your chest at night. But it was my quiet, my grief, my routine. Then my son, Ethan, started showing up. At first, I thought it was love. He came on Tuesdays, then Thursdays, then suddenly every other day. He'd do the dishes without me asking. He'd take my trash bins to the curb. He'd comment on things he never cared about before, like whether my smoke alarm batteries were fresh. "You shouldn't have to worry about anything anymore," he said one afternoon, leaning on my kitchen counter like he owned it. I laughed, because that's what mothers do when their kids say something that feels too heavy. But I also felt a small pinch of unease. His energy was rushed, like his kindness had a deadline. Then the paperwork started. He brought a folder one day, thick, clean, organized like a banker's dream. "Mom, I've been thinking, you shouldn't be handling all this, bills, property stuff, insurance. It's stressful. Let me take it." I stared at the folder. "Ethan, I've paid bills since before you could spell electricity." He chuckled, but his eyes stayed locked on that folder. "Exactly, you've done enough." That line should have warmed my heart. Instead, it made the air feel colder. Still, I let him help, because I was tired, because grief makes you crave relief, and because I wanted to believe my son was stepping up as a man. Over the next few weeks, he'd sit at my dining table with my mail spread out like a crime scene. He'd ask questions fast, too fast. "Where's the deed paperwork? Who's listed on the property taxes? Do you still have the old mortgage records?" Every question landed like a tap on glass, small, harmless, until you realize someone's testing for cracks. I asked him once, "Why are you so focused on the house?" He didn't miss a beat. "Because it's your biggest asset, Mom, and I want to protect you." Protect me. I remember swallowing hard, forcing myself to nod, but my fingers kept tightening around my coffee mug. If your adult child suddenly became too involved in your finances, would you feel comforted or would you feel suspicious? Because I felt both. Then came the day my body betrayed me. It started with fatigue, the kind that doesn't go away after sleep, then dizziness, then nausea so sharp I couldn't stand long enough to make toast. Ethan insisted on driving me to the doctor. He held my arm like I was fragile glass. At the clinic, my blood pressure was dangerously high. They ran tests, more tests, and by nightfall, I was in a hospital bed. I remember Ethan standing at the foot of it, hands in his pockets, nodding along as doctors spoke in calm voices about monitoring and possible complications. His face looked concerned, but underneath that, I saw something else. Relief, like something had finally lined up in his favor. I tried to brush it off. Maybe I was paranoid. Maybe pain was making me see monsters in my own child. Then the sedation came. They gave me medication that made the room blur at the edges. My eyelids became heavy, like curtains closing. A nurse leaned close and said, "We just need a few signatures, honey." I remember a pen in my hand. I remember paper sliding under my palm. I remember Ethan's voice, soft as sugar. "Just sign, Mom. This is standard." My hand moved. My name appeared. Then the world went dark. And when I woke up days later, Ethan was already managing things I never gave him permission to touch.
When you're sick enough, time stops being yours. It becomes something that happens to you. I was in the hospital for weeks, not days, weeks. My body felt like it had been unplugged from itself. Some mornings, I couldn't remember what month it was. Some nights, I'd wake up convinced Richard was beside me, only to realize it was just the hum of machines. Ethan came almost every day, always with something helpful. A new blanket, a bag of toiletries, a smoothie I didn't ask for. And every time he'd say the same thing, "Don't worry about anything at home. I've got it." At first, those words were a comfort. Then they became a threat, because I started noticing what wasn't happening. My best friend, Marianne, never showed up until one day I called her myself. "Why haven't you visited?" I asked, trying to sound light. There was a pause on the line. Then, "Honey, Ethan told me you didn't want visitors. He said you needed rest." My throat went tight. "I never said that." Another pause. Then her voice lowered. "That boy, what is he doing?" I told myself it was a misunderstanding. It had to be. But then the nurses started saying things. Casual things, the kind of comments that feel harmless to them until they land on your heart like stones. One nurse, changing my IV, said, "Your son is really on top of things. All those forms, he had them ready." I blinked. "Forms?" She smiled. "Oh, just the usual. Insurance authorizations, release documents, some property-related stuff." Property-related stuff? My stomach dipped. I tried to sit up, but my body didn't cooperate. "I signed those?" I asked. She shrugged like it was nothing. "You did, when you were sleepy. But it's normal. Families handle it." Families handle it? My pulse hammered. That night when Ethan walked in, I studied him like he was a stranger wearing my son's face. He kissed my forehead. "How's my tough mom doing?" I forced a smile. "Fine." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a stack of mail. "I'm sorting everything for you. You don't need stress." "What mail?" I asked, too quickly. He froze, just for a half second. Then he recovered. "Everything. Bills, notices, you know." I nodded slowly. But inside, something woke up, a mother's instinct. The same instinct that told me when Ethan lied as a teenager. The same instinct that told me he'd been sneaking out at night. It was back now, older and sharper. I started paying attention. Ethan always showed up alone. He always positioned himself between me and the nurses when paperwork came around. And he always seemed to know what needed signing before anyone explained it. One day, I asked a different nurse quietly, "Can I see the documents I signed?" Her expression shifted just slightly. "I'd have to ask administration." "Please," I said. She nodded and left. When she returned, she didn't have papers. She had an excuse. She said, "They're already filed, but if you want copies, we can request them. It might take time." Time. That's what Ethan was counting on. I realized it then. He wasn't helping me, he was managing me, and I couldn't accuse him outright. Not yet, because if I did, he'd know I was awake. So I played the role he expected, the weak mother, grateful and confused. I smiled. I thanked him. I let him think his plan was working. But every night after he left, I stared at the ceiling and made myself a promise. If Ethan was stealing something from me, I would get it back. And I wouldn't do it with screaming or tears. I would do it with paperwork, with patience, and with precision. Then I got discharged, and the very first thing I saw at home proved my worst fear was already real.
The smell of home should have made me feel safe. Instead, it made me feel like I'd walked into someone else's life. Ethan drove me back from the hospital in silence. Not angry silence, strategic silence, like he was letting me fill in the gaps with gratitude. When we pulled into the driveway, he said, "I cleaned up. You just focus on resting." I nodded, but my eyes went straight to the front porch. The doormat was different. The flower pots had been moved, and my wind chime, the one Richard bought me in Cape Cod, was gone. Small things, but small things are how people mark territory. Inside, everything looked tidy, too tidy. My mail basket by the door was empty. "You've been collecting the mail?" I asked casually. "Of course," he said, too quickly, didn't want it piling up. Then he walked into the kitchen and started making tea like he belonged there. I sat on the couch, my body still weak, and tried to breathe through the panic that kept rising. That night, after Ethan left, I did the first thing I'd been too sick to do for weeks. I checked the mail slot. There was one envelope, just one, like someone had missed it. It was a property tax notice, and it wasn't addressed to me. It said, "Ethan Caldwell." My address, my house. My fingers went numb. I read it again, and again, like repetition would turn it into a mistake. But it wasn't. My son's name was on the tax notice for my home. I didn't sleep. I sat at the dining table with that paper in front of me until dawn, listening to the refrigerator hum and my own heartbeat. In the morning, I called the county office. The woman on the phone sounded bored until she pulled up the record. "Oh, yes, ma'am," she said. "The deed was transferred recently." My throat closed. Transferred to what? There was a click of keyboard. Then, to Ethan Caldwell. It was recorded properly. Recorded properly. I felt like I was going to throw up. "But that's my house. I didn't—" "Ma'am," she interrupted gently, "if you have a dispute, you may want to contact an attorney." An attorney. Like I was fighting a stranger, not the boy I gave birth to. I hung up and stared at the wall where Richard's photo still sat on the shelf. "I'm sorry," I whispered, and I didn't even know who I was apologizing to. Then the anger came. Not loud anger, the quiet kind, the kind that turns your blood cold and clears your mind. I could have called Ethan right then. I could have screamed. I could have demanded an explanation. But I didn't, because I understood something terrifying. If Ethan could steal my house once, he could do something worse if he felt cornered. So I did the hardest thing a betrayed mother can do. I pretended I didn't know. When Ethan visited later, I smiled like normal. I offered him cookies. I listened while he talked about work stress and housing market opportunities. He watched me carefully the whole time, like he was waiting for me to slip. I didn't. Instead, I asked innocent questions. "How's your girlfriend, Tessa? Still thinking about buying a place someday?" He shrugged. "Maybe. Depends." Depends on what, Ethan? Depends on whether you can sell my home? I nodded like I believed him, and as he talked, I watched his hands. Those same hands that held mine when I was dying. Those same hands that guided a pen into my sedated fingers. Tell me, if your child betrayed you like this, would you confront them right away, or would you go quiet and plan? Because I chose quiet.
And that choice saved me. But I wasn't sure I had any legal path left until I made one phone call to someone from my past. The most dangerous moment in any family revenge story is when you realize love made you easy to rob. I didn't want revenge, not at first. I wanted understanding. I wanted there to be some explanation that didn't make my son a thief. But the county clerk's words wouldn't leave my head, recorded properly. I needed someone who understood the system, someone who couldn't be charmed by Ethan's good son act. So I called Frank Delaney. Frank was an old friend of my late husband, retired now. He'd worked for years as a clerk and later studied law, the kind of man who speaks slowly and listens like every word matters. When he answered, I didn't even say hello right. "Frank," I whispered, "I think Ethan stole my house." There was a pause. Then, calm as a judge, "Tell me everything. Start from the first hospital day." I told him about the sedation, the papers, the nurse's comment, the tax notice. Frank didn't gasp. He didn't say, "Oh my God." He said something worse. "This happens more than you think." My stomach dropped. "So I'm too late?" "Not necessarily," he said, "but you need to act carefully and quietly." Quietly. That word again, like the universe was confirming my instinct. Frank explained the basics in plain language. If consent was given while I was impaired, if signatures were obtained during sedation without proper verification, if there was undue influence, there could be grounds to challenge the transfer. But he warned me, it depends on timing, documentation, and how clean they made it look. They. I latched onto that. "Frank, you said they." He exhaled. "Your son didn't learn this on his own. Someone coached him, or benefited with him." And suddenly, my mind snapped to Tessa, Ethan's girlfriend, a real estate agent, always polished, always smiling, always calling me sweetie in that syrupy way that made me feel older than I was. I remembered little comments she'd made months ago. "How much land is this? Have you ever thought about downsizing? This neighborhood is hot right now." At the time, I thought it was conversation. Now, it sounded like scouting. Frank said, "Do not confront him yet. If he suspects you're challenging the deed, he could sell fast. He could refinance. He could bury you in paperwork." My hands clenched. "He's my son." Frank's voice softened. "I know, but right now, he's acting like your adversary. Treat him that way until you have leverage." Leverage. That word tasted bitter, because mothers aren't supposed to need leverage against their children. Frank told me to start a file. Every date, every visit, every message. Copies of medical records, sedation logs, anything that proved I wasn't competent at the time. Then he said something that made my throat burn. "And write a letter." "A letter?" "Yes," he said. "A certified letter can freeze things, and personal letters can remind someone what they're really doing. Sometimes paper hits harder than yelling." I stared at my kitchen table, the same table where Ethan spread my mail like he owned my life. That night, I took out a notebook. Not my fancy stationery, not something dramatic, just a simple notebook, because this wasn't for show. This was for war. I wrote down facts, dates, hospital room numbers I remembered, nurses' names I remembered, times Ethan visited, times he insisted on helping. Then I started the personal letter, not the legal one, the human one. "Ethan," I wrote, "I don't know when you stopped seeing me as your mother and started seeing me as an opportunity." My tears fell onto the page, blotting ink. I wiped them away and kept writing anyway. Because the truth is, I wasn't just fighting for a building, I was fighting for my dignity. But while I was collecting evidence, Ethan was getting bolder, and he made one careless move that gave me the opening I needed. The scariest part wasn't that Ethan took my home. It was how quickly he started living like he'd already won. Within days, his visits changed. He stopped bringing groceries, stopped asking how I felt. Now he walked in and looked around, like a landlord inspecting a property. One afternoon, he said, casually, "I'm thinking of updating the kitchen. Granite counters, it'll increase value." Increase value? I smiled weakly. That sounds expensive. He shrugged. Not really, and it's an investment. An investment, not a memory, not my home, a flipping opportunity. I wanted to scream, "You're talking about your dead father's house like it's a stock." But I kept my face smooth because every time he got comfortable, he slipped, and I needed him to slip. The slip came sooner than I expected. Ethan left his phone on the coffee table when he went to the bathroom. It buzzed once, then again, then again. I shouldn't have looked, but I did. The screen lit up with a message preview from Tessa. "Make sure she doesn't find out before closing. If she does, we're dead." My heart slammed against my ribs. So Frank was right. Ethan wasn't just stealing, he was partnering. When Ethan returned, I had already placed the phone back exactly as it was. I sat there, hands folded, like an obedient old woman. He didn't notice a thing. That night, I called Frank and told him what I saw. He didn't sound surprised. He said, "Good, that confirms motive. Now we move faster." Faster. Frank helped me request my medical records, not just summaries, the sedation administration times, nursing notes, any mention of signatures. While we waited, he had me do something else. Write my timeline like a confession, not emotional, factual, because courts don't run on tears, they run on dates. At the same time, I began preparing the legal correction route Frank mentioned, depending on what the documents showed. If there was improper consent timing, it could crack the whole transfer, but I needed proof. Meanwhile, Ethan started bringing strangers by. The first time, I heard voices outside, a man's laugh, a woman's bright "wow." I peeked through the curtain and saw Ethan standing with a couple near my garden, pointing at my windows like he was already selling them. My hands shook. He hadn't even told me. When I opened the door, Ethan's smile flashed, sharp and forced. "Mom, these are friends," he said quickly. "They just wanted to see the place." The couple looked uncomfortable, like they'd walked into something they weren't supposed to witness. I smiled at them, polite, sweet, but I let my eyes land on Ethan, and in that look, I said something without words. "I see you." He blinked just once, then he laughed too loudly. After they left, he said, "Don't worry, I'm just exploring options." I nodded, acting confused. Options for what? He paused, then chose his words carefully. "In case you ever needed to move somewhere easier." There it was, the lie, the excuse, the story he planned to tell everyone. I walked to the sink, pretending to rinse a cup so he wouldn't see my face harden. Because now I knew his endgame. He wanted to sell my home while I was still weak enough to be controlled. Frank called 2 days later. "Your records are in," he said. My stomach clenched. And there was a moment of silence that felt like a drumbeat. Then, "We have something." My knees nearly gave out. "What do we have?" He said, "A nursing note mentions you were heavily sedated at the time of signature, and the witness section looks inconsistent." Inconsistent? A crack, a flaw, a doorway. Frank's voice turned firm. "Now we prepare the certified letter and we time it for maximum impact." Maximum impact. I thought about Ethan's smug smile, Tessa's text, their talk of closing, and I realized something terrifying and empowering. They weren't just stealing my home, they were rushing, which meant they were afraid. So I let them run faster, right into the trap I was setting. The best revenge doesn't start with a fight. It starts with letting the thief believe the door's locked, until they realized it's locked from the inside. Frank and I planned like we were defusing a bomb, because that's what this was. One wrong move, and Ethan could sell the house before I could blink. Frank said, "You need to appear harmless, confused, grateful. Let him underestimate you." I laughed, dry, bitter. He's been underestimating me his whole life. So I leaned into it. When Ethan visited, I asked him to reach things from high shelves. I let my hands tremble when I poured tea. I talked about being tired and not understanding all that paperwork stuff. And Ethan ate it up. He started showing up less. He stopped checking on my mood.
He stopped watching my eyes because in his mind, he already owned me. But behind the scenes, Frank and I were moving. We prepared two things: a legal correction package to challenge the transfer based on consent impairment, and a certified letter that would hit Ethan where he felt safest, his confidence. Frank also had me write something else. Not for court, not for Ethan, for me. A letter to Richard. I wrote, "I thought our son would protect what we built. Instead, he tried to bury me in it." And writing that made something settle in my chest. Not sadness, resolve. Then came the timing. Ethan's friends came again, different couple this time. They walked through the front yard, nodding, pointing, measuring with their eyes. I stood at the window and watched like a ghost in my own home. That night, Ethan called me, not visited, which told me everything. He didn't want to look me in the face when he lied. "Hey, Mom," he said, voice smooth. "Just checking in." "I'm fine," I said softly. "You're busy." He chuckled. "Yeah, lots going on." Then he dropped it. "So, if I sold the house, you'd be okay, right? I mean, we could get you a smaller place, maybe assisted living, somewhere safe." Assisted living. Translation, somewhere I couldn't interfere. I let silence hang long enough to make him nervous. Then I whispered, "If you think it's best." His relief was audible. "Good, good. I'm glad you trust me." Trust. That word made my teeth hurt. After the call, I sat down and stared at the notebook where I'd been writing everything: dates, times, text previews, the nurse's statement, the tax notice. Frank's words echoed. Maximum impact. The next morning, I asked Ethan if he could help me with one more thing. He arrived, smug, thinking I was handing him the last piece of control. I said, "I need you to print something for my email. My eyes aren't good." He sighed like I was an inconvenience. "Sure." I watched him log onto my computer, his fingers flying like he owned it. He didn't notice I was watching his reflection in the dark TV screen. He opened my email, and there, right at the top, was a message from Frank. Subject line, "Deed transfer irregularities, next steps." Ethan froze, just for a second, but I saw it. His breathing changed, his hand tightened on the mouse. He clicked it before I could stop him. He read, his face drained of color. Then he shut the laptop so hard the table shook. "What is this?" he snapped. I blinked slowly, playing the role. "What is what, honey?" He stood up, towering over me. For the first time, the mask dropped, and I saw him. Not my son, a man who thought I was property. I put a hand to my chest like I was confused. "Oh, Ethan, are you upset?" His eyes darted, calculating. Then he forced a laugh. "Mom, you shouldn't be messing with lawyers. You'll just stress yourself out." I nodded. "You're right." And he believed me, because he didn't know the letter was already sealed, already scheduled to arrive at the worst possible moment. 2 days later, Ethan tried to finalize the sale, and that's when the transaction suddenly froze. You want to know the moment karma becomes real? It's when the person who thought they were untouchable suddenly realizes the ground beneath them isn't solid. 2 days after Ethan saw that email, he didn't come by. No call, no groceries, no fake concern. Just silence. But I wasn't panicking anymore. Silence is a gift when you're planning. Frank told me the certified letter had been sent, timed for when Ethan would be most vulnerable, during the sale process. Because that's when people reveal their true faces, when money is on the table and time is running out. On the third day, my phone rang. Ethan's name flashed. I let it ring once longer than usual, not as a game, as a boundary. Then I answered, "Hello?" His voice was strained, breathy. "Mom, did you do something?" I kept my tone soft. Do something like what? "The sale, the title company, everything is stopped. They said there's an issue with the deed." I sat down slowly, like I might faint, not because I was weak, because I wanted him to hear weakness. "Oh no," I whispered. "An issue?" "Yeah," he barked. "They got a letter, a certified letter. They said it challenges ownership. They said it mentions you were sedated when you signed."
I pictured him in some sterile office, gripping his phone, eyes wide, realizing his shortcut had a price. I said nothing. And in that silence, Ethan did what guilty people always do. He filled it with confession. "Mom, listen, this isn't what you think," he said quickly. "I was helping you. You weren't well. You needed me to take over." I swallowed. Then I spoke, calm and even. "Ethan, you took my house." His breath hitched. "No, Mom, it's still for you. I was going to—" "Stop," I said. One word. No yelling. He froze. I could hear it. I continued, voice steady like a knife. "You didn't ask. You didn't tell me. You did it when I couldn't understand." He tried a different tactic. Anger. "Why are you doing this? Why would you embarrass me like this?" Embarrass. Not betray, not steal. Embarrass. I almost laughed. Instead, I asked quietly, "Did you think I'd die before I noticed?" Silence. That silence told me everything. Then he said, softer, like he was the victim, "Mom, I have debt. You don't understand. Tessa said—" "Tessa," I repeated, so he admitted it without realizing. He snapped back, "Don't bring her into this." But it was too late. The thread was already pulled. Frank had warned me that Ethan might threaten me once he felt cornered, so I stayed calm. Calm makes unstable people collapse faster. "I'm not arguing," I said. "I'm correcting." He scoffed. "Correcting what? It's legal." I inhaled slowly. "It was recorded. That doesn't mean it was right." Ethan's voice rose. "You're my mother. How can you do this to me?" And there it was, the oldest manipulation in the book. So I said the truth, plain and clean. "You stopped being my son the day you decided my illness was your opportunity." He made a sound, half growl, half sob. "Fine, you want war? We'll do war." My hands were steady. "Ethan," I said gently, "you already declared war. I just showed up." Then I hung up. My heart pounded after, not fear, grief. Because no matter how strong you are, hearing your child become your enemy breaks something inside you. But I didn't fall apart. I walked to the drawer where I kept Richard's watch. I held it, and I reminded myself, this house wasn't just property. It was the proof I survived. If your child threatened you after being caught, would you forgive or would you finish what you started? Because I wasn't done. And the next thing Ethan didn't expect was that my plan wasn't just to stop the sale. It was to expose exactly how he did it.
Stopping the sale was satisfying, but satisfaction isn't justice. Justice is when the thief realizes the same paperwork they used to hurt you can also destroy their future. After Ethan's call, I didn't hear from him for 2 days. No apology, no explanation, just silence again. Then Marianne came over. She walked in, saw my face, and didn't even ask questions first. She just said, "That boy did something, didn't he?" I nodded, and for the first time since the hospital, I let myself cry. Not because I was defeated, but because I finally had a witness. Marianne sat with me at the kitchen table while I laid it all out. The tax notice, the deed transfer, the nurse's comments, Tess's message preview. Marianne's mouth tightened. "That's not a son," she said. "That's a predator who knows your favorite lullaby." That line hit me so hard I had to look away. Frank arrived the next day with copies of everything. The nursing notes, the sedation timing, the inconsistencies. He explained the next steps. We weren't just disputing ownership. We were documenting undue influence and improper consent, meaning Ethan's legal transfer was built on sand. Then Frank asked me something I didn't expect. "Do you want him punished, or do you want your life back?" I stared at my hands. I thought about Ethan as a child, sleeping on my chest.
Then I thought about Ethan as a man, standing over me after reading Frank's email, anger in his eyes like I was an obstacle. "I want my life back," I said, "and I want him to never try this again. Not to me, not to anyone." Frank nodded. "Then we do this clean. We restore title, we build a record, and we let the consequences follow him naturally." Naturally, meaning no screaming, no threats, just a paper trail strong enough to outlive any lies. Ethan finally came by on the third day, unannounced, of course. I heard his car and felt my stomach twist, but I didn't run. I stood in my living room and waited. He walked in without knocking, another tiny claim of ownership. He looked tired, not guilty tired, panic tired. He didn't sit, he paced. "Mom," he said, "we need to talk." I gestured to the chair. "Then sit." He sat, then stood again, then sat again. He was unraveling. He said, "I can fix this. I can put it back in your name, but you have to stop this legal thing. You're making me look like a criminal." I tilted my head. "Aren't you?" His face hardened. "You're my son." I nodded slowly. "Yes, that's why this hurts." He leaned forward. "You don't understand how hard it is out there. People do what they have to do." I held his gaze. "And you decided what you had to do was take from a sick woman?" He flinched at "sick woman" because it made him hear it outside the mother-son story. He tried again, quieter. "Please, I'm asking you." And in that moment, I saw something. Not remorse, fear of consequences. So I said the line I'd been practicing in my head for weeks. "I'm not destroying you, Ethan. I'm just refusing to be destroyed." He stared at me like he didn't recognize the woman speaking. Then he did something that made my skin crawl. He smiled, a cold, thin smile. "You think you've won?" he said. "You're old, Mom. You can't fight forever." I smiled back, gentle. "That's why I don't have to." I reached into the side drawer and pulled out a sealed envelope. Not the certified one, that was already done. This one was personal. "I wrote you something," I said. "It's not court paperwork, it's a letter." His eyes narrowed. He didn't take it, like paper could burn him. I placed it on the table between us. "You can read it whenever you're ready to meet your own reflection." He stared at it for a long moment, then he stood up abruptly. "This isn't over," he muttered, and walked out. I watched through the window as he sat in his car, gripping the steering wheel. He didn't leave right away. He was scared of an envelope. But the real shock wasn't the envelope on my table, it was the letter I had already arranged to be opened if Ethan pushed this any further.
Some people think revenge is loud, but the most terrifying revenge is the kind that waits quietly in a drawer, already addressed, already signed. Frank and I had restored the process to a point where Ethan couldn't sell, but Ethan was still Ethan, reckless when he felt trapped. Frank warned me, if he's desperate, he may try to refinance, or he may try to pressure you into signing something new. And sure enough, Ethan tried. He called one evening, voice suddenly gentle again. "Mom, can we meet? Just us. No lawyers, no Frank." My heart tightened, because I knew that tone. It was the same tone he used when he was 16 and wanted to borrow my car after he'd already crashed it once. I said, "You can come by, but Frank will be here." His voice turned sharp. "Why are you making it like this?" "Because you made it like this," I replied. He showed up anyway, but not alone. Tessa stood beside him on my porch, arms crossed like she was the homeowner and I was the problem tenant. I opened the door and didn't invite them in right away. That tiny pause made Tessa's smile falter. "Mrs. Caldwell," she said, sweet as poison, "we just want what's best for everyone." Frank stepped into view behind me. Tessa's eyes flicked to him, calculating, instantly. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Mom, this is ridiculous." Frank's voice was calm. "Ridiculous is transferring property from a sedated patient." Tessa laughed lightly, like it was a joke. There's no proof she didn't understand. Frank pulled out the nursing note copies. "There's documentation," he said. Tessa's face stiffened. Ethan's eyes darted.
Then Ethan tried the last weapon he had, emotional blackmail. "You're choosing a friend over your son," he said. "Dad would be ashamed." That line hit like a slap. For a second, my knees went weak, and then something inside me stood up. Not anger, not grief, clarity. I looked Ethan dead in the eyes. "Your father would be ashamed of you," I said quietly, "not because you're struggling, but because you chose to steal from someone who would have helped you if you just asked." The porch went silent. Even the birds seemed to stop. Tessa's eyes narrowed. Ethan's lips parted, like he'd been waiting his whole life for permission to hate me. Then he snapped, "Fine, keep your house, keep your little victory, but don't come crying when you're alone." Alone. That's what he thought my fear was. But I wasn't afraid of being alone. I'd survived widowhood. I'd survived sickness. I was afraid of being owned. Frank stepped forward. "We'll be filing the corrective documentation to restore title and ensure future transactions require verified consent," he said. Tessa's mouth tightened. "You can't prove—" Frank cut her off. "You don't need to prove everything to freeze a sale. You just need enough to raise a serious question. And now there's a record." A record. That was the real consequence. Not jail, not public shame. A permanent trail that would follow Ethan into every future deal. Ethan stared at the papers like they were snakes. Then he turned to me with a final look, one part rage, one part disbelief. He truly thought mothers didn't fight back. He truly thought love meant surrender. He left. Tessa followed, heels clicking like punctuation. And when their car pulled away, I exhaled a breath I felt like I'd been holding since the hospital. Inside, I sat at my dining table. I opened my notebook and wrote, "Today I chose me." Then I walked to a small drawer in my bedroom and I touched the second letter, the one Frank helped me prepare. It was addressed not to Ethan, but to the county office and relevant parties, a final statement with attachments to be used if Ethan ever attempted another transfer, another sale, another manipulation. In other words, a trap that would spring automatically. Because I wasn't just getting my house back, I was building a fence around my life. Would you set up a second strike safeguard like that? Something that protects you even when you're tired? Because that's what saved my peace. And in the end, Ethan thought he lost a house, but what he really lost was access to me. People keep asking me, "Do you miss your son?" And the honest answer is, I miss the son I thought I had. The one who used to run into the house after school asking what was for dinner. The one who cried when his father died. The one who once promised, "I'll take care of you, Mom." But promises mean nothing when someone uses them as camouflage. I got my house back not because I was lucky, because I stopped hoping Ethan would suddenly become good, and I started acting like I deserved protection. That's the quiet part no one talks about in a family revenge story. Sometimes revenge isn't ruining them, it's refusing to let them ruin you. The deed was corrected, the sale was stopped, and the boundaries, they were finally real. Ethan never apologized, not a real one, and maybe he never will. But I sleep in my bed now without feeling like I'm living on borrowed time. I walk through my home and feel Richard again, not in grief, but in strength. And that letter I left, it wasn't just paper. It was a line in ink that said, "You can't rewrite my life while I'm still living it." If this story hit you in the chest, subscribe, because these are the stories that remind us we're not crazy for trusting our instincts, and we're not wrong for protecting ourselves. And I want you to tell me in the comments, if you discovered your child transferred your house while you were sick, what would you do next? Would you confront them or plan in silence like I did? Because your answer might help someone else who's living this nightmare right now.